So, statistically speaking, eating a standard, like, meat-heavy diet actually has the exact same environmental impact as owning a fleet of gas-guzzling cars and flying private.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild comparison.
I mean, when I first read that, I genuinely thought it was a typo. Like, it had to be a mistake.
A lot of people think that.
But, today is Sunday, April 5th, 2026, and we are looking at this massive mountain of fresh data from the last year. We've got scientific meta-analyses, these huge global consumer surveys from YouGov and the ET Forum, and a major international policy report.
There is so much data to sift through right now.
Exactly. And the whole point of this deep dive is to answer one core question for you. How exactly did a hamburger become the equivalent of a Boeing 747? And, is this massive global pivot toward plant-based living just some brilliant marketing trend, or is it like an absolute necessity for our survival?
It's definitely a question a lot of people are wrestling with right now. I mean, it's totally understandable.
Because it feels like it's everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. When you see constant media coverage about, the newest vegan challenge or some celebrity launching a plant-based brand, your reflex might just be to roll your eyes.
Yeah, you just assume it's another fad diet.
Exactly. But the data we're sitting on today, it shows something much deeper. We're cracking a permanent structural shift in the entire global food system.
Okay, let's unpack this right away, because I have to push back on the word permanent right out of the gate.
Okay, sure.
Because if we look at the raw numbers, like from January 2025, yes, 25.8 million people globally signed up for Veganuary.
Right, a huge jump.
It's a massive number of people.
Yeah.
But behaviorally, don't we see this huge drop-off by February? Like, people treat it like a New Year's resolution. They buy some tofu, they get totally bored, and they just go right back to their old habits.
Well, you do see an initial drop-off, absolutely. But what you really have to look at is the baseline.
Okay, the baseline.
Right, and that baseline is rising aggressively. So global analysts estimate that, as of right now, roughly 79 million people identify as strictly vegan globally.
Wow, 79 million.
Yeah. And, I mean, in the grand scheme of an 8 billion person planet, 1.1% sounds tiny. But the velocity of the growth, especially within specific demographics, that's what financial markets and policymakers are watching so closely.
So who exactly is driving that velocity? Are we talking about like a specific age group or a certain region?
It's mostly generational, really. Let's look at the UK as a sort of microcosm. In 2025, the vegan population there hit 4.7%.
Wait, really? 4.7?
Yeah, which is a 2.4-fold increase in just 2 years. And it gets crazier when you survey Generation Z in the UK. Half of them, 50%, stated they plan to adopt a completely meat-free diet.
Half of Gen Z. That's insane.
And millennials aren't far behind. They're sitting at 36%.
I mean, that is a staggering slice of the future consumer base, which I guess totally explains why the global plant-based food market is projected to skyrocket.
The financial projections are massive.
Yeah, like I read it's jumping from $14.2 billion last year in 2025 to over $44 billion by 2035. Industry doesn't project a triple-digit leap unless they're seeing sustained repeat purchasing, right?
Exactly. They know it's not just a passing phase. But the consumer surveys, specifically the recent one from the EE Forum, reveal a major friction point. They call it the intention gap.
The intention gap, what does that mean?
So 68% of the people surveyed globally stated they actually want to eat more plant-based foods, but only 20% actually do it with any regularity.
So there's this massive disconnect between what we aspire to put on our plates and what actually ends up there when it's time for dinner.
Precise.
And I want to dig into the motivation behind that 68%. Because the assumption is usually that people are changing their diets to save the rainforests or, like, protect the oceans.
That's the assumption, yeah.
Yeah.
But the data flips that entirely. Consistently, across almost all these global surveys, the number one driver for adopting a plant-based diet isn't planetary health at all.
It's not.
No, it's personal health.
Well, I mean, that makes biological sense. Self-preservation is a pretty strong human instinct.
Right.
But from a scientific perspective, the term plant-based is incredibly broad, isn't it? Like, you could eat Oreo cookies and French fries and sugary sodas all day, and technically that's a vegan diet.
Oh, the junk food vegan diet. Yeah, it's a real thing.
Right. So how does the science actually separate those junk food vegans from the healthy ones? Like, how are these 2025 and 2026 meta-analyses defining a diet that yields actual medical benefits?
What's fascinating here is that this distinction is really the bedrock of the science. The cardiovascular and longevity benefits we see in the literature, they do not apply to someone living on potato chips and refined grains.
I figured. So what's the strict definition?
The literature explicitly defines the protective diet as a whole food, plant predominant pattern.
Whole food, plant predominant.
Exactly, meaning the vast majority of your caloric intake comes from intact structures. So fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds.
So the benefit isn't just about the absence of meat. It's really about the presence of all those complex, fibrous structures that are replacing it.
That's exactly it. It's what you add, not just what you subtract.
So what kind of impact are we actually seeing on the body when someone shifts to that whole food pattern? Because, heart disease is still the leading cause of death globally.
Yeah, and the cardiovascular data is probably the most robust part of all this. We have these umbrella meta-analyses covering over 150 studies.
150,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, and they consistently show a 23% lower risk of cardiovascular disease for those on a whole food plant-based diet compared to omnivores.
23%, just from a diet change.
Right, and a major 2025 review in the Journal of Atherosclerosis Prevention and Treatment actually mapped out the underlying physiological changes, like what is physically happening.
Right, so what specifically changes in the body's chemistry?
Well, they observed systemic drops in surrogate markers. So, for instance, body mass index drops by about 1.67. Waist circumference goes down by nearly 5 centimeters.
Oh, wow.
And systolic blood pressure noticeably decreases by about 1.65 millimeters of mercury. If you think of your vascular system like plumbing, a whole food plant diet essentially dials down the physical pressure pounding against the walls of your heart and arteries.
That is a great analogy. And didn't they also record significant drops in C-reactive protein?
Yes, a drop of about 0.54.
And just for context, C-reactive protein is basically the body's alarm system for inflammation, right?
Exactly. It's a biomarker produced by your liver when there is systemic inflammation.
So if it's high, that's bad news.
Right. High levels indicate your immune system is essentially stuck in overdrive. And over time, that constant state of alert damages your blood vessels. But the high fiber and high antioxidant profile of a whole food plant diet actively cools that inflammation down.
That makes a lot of sense. The blood sugar data caught my eye as well, especially considering the massive type 2 diabetes epidemic we have globally.
Oh, the diabetes data is striking.
Yeah, the meta-analyses noted these clinically meaningful drops in HbA1c. I think it was a drop of about 0.36%. For anyone listening who isn't diabetic, could you explain why HbA1c is a more reliable metric than just, pricking your finger to test your blood sugar after a meal?
It's a great question because a daily blood sugar test only tells you how much glucose is floating in your blood at that exact second.
That's a snapshot.
Exactly. But HbA1c measures the percentage of your red blood cells that have sugar-coated proteins attached to them.
Okay.
And because red blood cells live for about 3 months, HbA1c gives your doctor a 90-day historical average of your blood sugar control.
Oh, so it's impossible to cheat the test just by eating well the day before.
Precisely. And the 2025 data showed that plant-based diets drop that HbA1c percentage by a clinically significant margin.
And the mechanism behind that is the fiber, right? Because fiber slows down the absorption of glucose into the bloodstream.
It's the dietary fiber, yes, but combined with the displacement of saturated animal fats.
Wait, how do the fats play into blood sugar?
So saturated fats actually build up inside your muscle cells, and they block the insulin receptors. It's sort of like putting gum in a keyhole.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the insulin can't unlock the cell to let the sugar in, so the sugar just stays trapped in the blood.
So when you strip away those saturated animal fats and replace them with whole plants, you're essentially clearing the gum out of the keyhole.
That's exactly what happens.
That makes perfect sense. And, when you clear the keyholes, drop the blood pressure, and cool the inflammation, the ultimate outcome is obviously longevity. Like, the data shows that swapping a typical Western diet for a whole food vegan, one, lowers premature mortality from non-communicable diseases by, 18 to 21%?
Yeah, 18 to 21%, which literally translates to millions of human lives extended globally every single year.
Millions of lives.
Yeah.
Okay, so the health benefits of the whole foods are undeniable at this point. But we really need to address the nutritional anxieties.
Ah, the famous myths.
Right. And since you listening are likely already well-versed in health topics, we aren't going to waste time asking that incredibly cliched question, where do you get your protein?
I appreciate that, because it's really a non-issue.
Yeah, we all know lentils, beans, and grains synthesize protein. But just to put a pin in it, a massive 28-year clinical study of over 5,000 patients found 0 protein deficiencies in vegans, right?
0. Unless you are literally starving, you are getting enough protein.
Okay, good. But I do want to ask about iron, because it's a known scientific fact that the non-heme iron found in plants is not absorbed by the human body as efficiently as the heme iron found in blood and muscle meat.
That is factually correct, yes.
So doesn't that inherently put plant-based eaters at a chronic disadvantage? Like, aren't they going to be anemic?
It definitely seems like it would, but human biology is remarkably adaptive. While it is true that non-heme iron is less bioavailable, the actual rate of iron deficiency anemia is not statistically higher in vegetarian or vegan populations.
Wait, how is that possible if they're absorbing less of it?
Because the gut actually upregulates its absorption machinery.
It just adapts.
Yeah. When the body senses it is relying on non-heme iron, it modifies the microbiome and increases the efficiency of the transport proteins in the intestines. It basically becomes a better sponge over time.
That's wild.
And plus, you can biochemically force the absorption by introducing ascorbic acid vitamin C.
Oh, right. So like squeezing a lemon over a spinach salad, or maybe eating bell peppers with your black beans?
Exactly. The vitamin C binds to the non-heme iron right in the digestive tract and converts it into a form that is much easier for the intestinal wall to absorb. It's just a simple biological hack.
Okay, that's easy enough. What about calcium and omega-3s?
Super easily managed. You get calcium from fortified milks and leafy greens. And as for omega-3s, people assume you must eat fish to get DHA and EPA, which, are crucial for brain health.
Right, everyone says eat salmon for your brain.
But the thing is, fish don't actually synthesize omega-3s themselves. They get them from eating microalgae in the ocean.
Oh, so you just bypass the fish entirely.
Precisely. Taking an algal oil supplement cuts out the middleman. It delivers the exact same marine omega-3s, but without the heavy metals often found in commercial fish.
Okay, but there's one nutrient that you simply cannot hack your way around with whole foods, and that's vitamin B12.
Yes, that's the real one.
And I have to ask a foundational question here. If a whole food plant-based diet is supposedly the most natural, optimal diet for human longevity, why does it require a lab-synthesized B12 supplement? Doesn't that sort of imply the diet is inherently unnatural or flawed?
It's a brilliant question, and it highlights a major misunderstanding about our modern food system.
How so?
Well, B12 is not produced by plants, true, but it's also not produced by animals.
Wait, really?
Really, it is synthesized exclusively by certain bacteria found in soil and untreated water.
So our ancestors are getting B12 simply because their world was covered in dirt.
Exactly. They drank from streams and they ate root vegetables pulled straight from the earth with the soil still on them.
Oh, wow.
But in our modern, highly sanitized world, we aggressively wash our produce and chlorinate our water to prevent things like cholera and E. coli. We've essentially eradicated the soil bacteria from our immediate food supply.
So how are the animals getting it then?
The animals we eat are often supplemented with B12 directly in their feed because even they aren't grazing on enough natural soil bacteria anymore.
So what you're saying is, whether you eat meat or plants, you are likely relying on a supplement anyway. It's just a question of whether you take the pill yourself or you feed it to a cow first.
That's the reality of modern agriculture. And a B12 deficiency leads to irreversible neurological damage. So taking a direct supplement is an absolute non-negotiable requirement for anyone fully plant-based.
Okay, that is incredibly clear. And I think that perfectly bridges us to the multi-billion-dollar elephant in the room.
The meat analogs.
Yes, because here's where it gets really interesting. We've established that whole, unprocessed plants are the gold standard. But as of 2022, the market for plant-based meat alternatives, the bleeding burgers, the soy-based sausages, the fake chicken nuggets, it was sitting at $6.1 billion.
It's a massive industry.
My analogy for these products has always been that they're like a dietary nicotine patch.
I like that.
Right. Like if you are trying to quit a heavy meat habit, they're a highly effective transitional tool.
Right.
But you obviously wouldn't want to wear a nicotine patch for the rest of your life.
Right.
So does the 2025 science agree with that? Are these ultra-processed foods actually helping people, or are they just junk food in a green disguise?
The nicotine patch is a highly accurate way to view them, actually, because many of these products absolutely fall into the category of ultra-processed foods.
Which we know are generally bad for us.
Right. But nutritional science requires context. If you compare a highly processed plant-based burger to a bowl of quinoa and black beans, the whole foods are going to win every single time.
Sure.
But that's not real-world behavior.
Right. Because the person hitting a drive-thru at midnight for a bacon double cheeseburger is definitely not debating between that and a kale salad.
Exactly. The scientific control group for a plant-based burger is a beef burger. And when a 2025 study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition made that exact swap, literally replacing meat with plant-based meat alternatives for 8 weeks, they recorded a 12% drop in LDL cholesterol.
12%.
Yes, and a 1% drop in overall body weight.
Just by making a one-to-one product swap, that's actually pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I also saw another 2025 review that mentioned drops in a compound called TMAO. Can you explain how that works? Because it seems incredibly relevant to heart health.
Oh, it's one of the most fascinating mechanisms in cardiology right now.
Okay, tell me.
So when you eat red meat, it contains high levels of a nutrient called L-carnitine.
Okay.
Certain bacteria in your gut absolutely feast on that carnitine, and they produce a byproduct called TMA. Your liver then converts that TMA into TMAO.
And TMAO is bad.
Very bad. High levels of TMAO in the blood actually prevent your body from clearing out cholesterol. It essentially accelerates plaque buildup in your arteries.
Let me get this straight. So the meat is fundamentally altering your gut microbiome to produce a chemical that literally clogs your arteries.
Yes. It's a chain reaction. And when you switch from a beef burger to a plant-based burger, you immediately stop feeding those specific TMA-producing gut bacteria.
So the TMAO levels just drop.
They plummet. Plus, you're completely eliminating the dietary cholesterol and severely reducing the saturated fat.
Wow. But there is a caveat, right? I know the MTJ Science of Food published a warning about relying too heavily on these patches.
They did. Their 2025 study found that while the lipid profiles improved, constant reliance on certain plant-based meat alternatives accidentally lowered overall protein density in the diet.
Which goes back to the protein myth, but in a different way.
Right. While we know protein deficiency is incredibly rare, optimal protein intake is vital, particularly for older adults who are trying to preserve muscle mass.
So the verdict really is, use the plant-based meats to get off the destructive path, but don't build your long-term nutritional house out of them.
Beautifully said. Yes.
Which brings us to the second half of our core question today. We've mapped out the internal physiological mechanisms, but what happens when we apply that exact same subtraction, removing the animal-based foods to the planet's plumbing?
The environmental impact.
Exactly. How do we justify that jarring statistic from earlier, comparing a hamburger to a Boeing 747?
It really comes down to greenhouse gas volume and efficiency. If we connect this to the bigger picture, according to comprehensive UN and IPCC data, global animal agriculture is responsible for 14.5% of all human-induced greenhouse gas emissions.
14.5%.
Which is equivalent to the exhaust from every single car, plane, train, and cargo ship on Earth combined.
I mean, trying to wrap my head around that scale is just insane. And the primary driver there isn't carbon dioxide, is it? It's methane.
Yes, specifically through a biological process called enteric fermentation.
Enteric fermentation, what is that exactly?
Basically, ruminant animals like cows and sheep have a specialized stomach compartment called a rumen. It's essentially this massive oxygen-free fermentation vat where microbes break down tough plant cellulose.
Okay.
And a natural byproduct of that microbial digestion is methane gas, which the animal burps out.
And methane is vastly more destructive than CO2 in the short term.
Oh, incredibly so. It traps roughly 25 to 30 times more heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide over a 100-year period.
25 times more heat.
Yeah. So when you have over 1 billion cattle on the planet constantly releasing methane, the atmospheric warming effect is staggering.
So what did the latest data show about exactly how much we can dial that back? I know a 2025 study in Frontiers in Nutrition tackled this directly.
They modeled a complete dietary swap. So if you take a standard 2,000-calorie Mediterranean omnivore diet, which, by the way, is generally considered quite balanced, and swap it to a 2,000-calorie vegan diet, the associated greenhouse gas emissions drop by 46%.
46% just from changing the food.
Yes. And land use drops by 33%. Water use drops by 7%.
And researchers at Oxford found even more extreme numbers if you swap out a heavy meat eater's diet, right? Like a 75% reduction in climate emissions and water pollution.
Yeah, the Oxford data is phenomenal, but the land use efficiency is perhaps the most shocking metric of all. Currently, meat and dairy provide only 37% of the protein consumed by humans globally.
Only 37%.
Yet producing that 37% requires 83% of all global farmland.
Wait. 83% of the world's agricultural land is used just to produce roughly a third of our protein?
Yes, because you aren't just housing the animals. You have to grow millions of acres of crops solely to feed them.
Which perfectly addresses the persistent soy myth. Because, anytime someone mentions the Amazon rainforest burning, the immediate counter-argument is always, well, look at all the vegans eating tofu and soy milk driving deforestation.
Oh, that argument is everywhere.
Are you saying the global soy supply chain is completely disconnected from human consumption?
It is a massive misdirection. Humans directly consume only about 6% of the soy grown globally.
Only 6%.
6%. 81% of the world's soy crop is cultivated specifically to be pulverized into high-protein feed for livestock, primarily cattle, pigs, and poultry.
Oh, wow.
So deforestation in the Amazon is overwhelmingly driven by the need to clear land for cattle grazing and to grow the soy required to feed livestock globally. Eating a block of tofu directly is vastly more efficient than feeding 10 blocks of soy to a chicken just to get a fraction of the calories back.
That fundamentally changes the math. But what about the water usage? Because the pushback against plant-based milk, specifically almond milk, has been intense. Critics point out that growing almonds requires heavy irrigation in drought-prone places like California.
Almonds are water-intensive, absolutely. But you always have to look at the baseline comparator. When you compare an almond crop to dairy or beef, the scale breaks. Producing 1 single kilogram of beef requires upwards of 15,000 liters of water when you factor in the lifetime hydration of the animal and the irrigation for all its feed.
15,000 liters for a couple of steaks.
Right. It makes the water footprint of almond or oat milk look like a rounding error. I think it takes something like 130 pints of water for a glass of almond milk, which is nothing compared to dairy.
It really is nothing, which is why the consensus among climate scientists is that transitioning away from animal agriculture is structurally essential to meeting global emissions targets.
It's no longer optional, yeah.
So if the physiological mechanisms prove it extends human life, and the ecological mechanisms prove it drastically reduces greenhouse gases and land use, we arrive at the million-dollar question. The 2025 Grains of Truth report showed that 86% of people want a sustainable diet.
Which is a huge majority.
It is. So why is there still such a massive intention gap? Why aren't we all just doing this tomorrow?
Because the global food environment is fundamentally stacked against the consumer. The barriers aren't a lack of motivation. They are affordability, convenience, and culinary literacy.
But wait, how does affordability factor in? Because whole foods like dried beans, brown rice, potatoes, and lentils are literally the cheapest calories per gram in the supermarket.
They are cheap to buy, yes. But they require time and knowledge to prepare, and we have built a modern society that is incredibly time poor.
Right, everyone is rushing.
Furthermore, agricultural subsidies in many Western nations artificially depress the price of meat and dairy.
Oh, so the market is skewed.
Exactly. So at the point of purchase, it is often faster and seemingly cheaper to buy a heavily subsidized, hyper-processed animal product than to buy fresh produce and spend an hour cooking it. It is a systemic failure of the food environment, not a personal moral failing of the consumer.
Which is why we are finally seeing policy shifts in 2025 and 2026. Governments are realizing that feeding an estimated 10 billion people by 2050 using animal agriculture is mathematically impossible.
The math just doesn't work.
And Denmark has really become the tip of the spear here, haven't they?
Denmark is a fascinating case study. They recently invested 96 million euros specifically into plant-based research and development.
Wow.
And they published the world's first national action plan to transition their entire agricultural sector toward plant-based foods.
That's huge.
It is. And the European Commission is currently facing massive pressure to finalize an EU-wide action plan by 2026. Because the goal isn't just climate mitigation anymore, it's national food security.
The reports also highlight a really profound ethical dimension to this structural shift. Obviously, as the data forces us to confront the inefficiencies of industrial animal agriculture, it also forces a conversation about the sheer scale of confinement and processing required to maintain it.
Yes, the animal welfare aspect.
Right. For many consumers, the shift is additionally driven by the desire to minimize unnecessary suffering for sentient animals, which really mirrors values found in various global philosophies and traditions.
It is a totally multifaceted transition. The economics, the ecology, the health science, and the ethics are all pointing in the exact same direction.
So, gathering up this incredible stack of data, we return to the core question: trend or necessity?
The science dictates it is a biological and planetary necessity. Full stop. But what the 2026 data emphasizes is that perfection isn't the requirement.
Meaning you don't have to go 100% vegan overnight.
Exactly. A major Dutch study recently found that simply cutting meat consumption in half, creating a hybrid flexitarian approach, yields massive compounding benefits for both public health and environmental stabilization.
So it's really a spectrum of progress.
Yes.
And I want to leave you listening at home with a final thought to mull over that builds on everything we've analyzed today. Right now, in 2026, we still largely frame plant-based eating as a sacrifice. We talk about it as giving something up or finding alternatives to the real thing.
Right. The language is always about loss.
Exactly. But what if, in a generation or two, our cultural taste buds and societal norms evolve entirely? Consider how fast culture moves. What if the concept of mass industrial animal agriculture eventually feels as bizarre and outdated to our grandchildren as smoking on an airplane feels to us today?
It's a highly plausible trajectory. Honestly, historically, once the data regarding human health and systemic risk becomes impossible to ignore, societal norms inevitably shift towards survival and efficiency.
And the data is absolutely impossible to ignore now. I highly encourage you to check out the show notes for the full list of peer-reviewed studies and reports we broke down today. The next time you are wandering down that grocery aisle, surrounded by all those new plant-based options, maybe look at your next meal not just as food, but as a small, powerful vote for the future.